of the 10th day of the month of Teves. It's also the yahrzeit of Rabbi Nassan, the great Talmud of Rabbi Nachman Breslov. And Schus Yagan and Valkoishal, like we were speaking about in the Chabur last night. But we are currently on Pei Gimel Amud Aleph. That is our Amud for today. We are right at the top of the Amud, where the Gemara is discussing the Tanaim that held like the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka in the Mishnah with regards to the point in time that that a Tamei apostle would be problematic with regards to the Pesach, and the Brisa had listed so far that Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka agrees with the opinion of Rabbi Nechemiah, and that and the Gemara is about to tell us that Rabbah has one more to add to the list. Rabbi Mosif, Rabbah added, Af Rabbi Yosef Glili also holds of this opinion. The Tanya, the Brisa tells us, Rabbi Yosef Glili told us, Kol ha'inyan kuloi, the whole thing. We'll discuss what that thing is in a second, but that whole thing, Ein medaber ella, but parim hanisrafim v'si'irim hanisrafim. That the whole inyan, the whole thing that we are talking about in a particular parsha in the Chumash is all talking about parim hanisrafim and si'irim hanisrafim. Rashi points out here, what are we talking about here? Kol parsha zu v'chol chatas asher yuva midama. The pasuk in the beginning of Vayikra Perek Vav, the Mokiler Abarim Maseches Zvachim, like the Gemara says in Zvachim, bechatas hachitzena sheichnis dama lifnim. We are talking about an external carbon that was brought on the outer mizbech, whose blood was brought inside. V'zeu psul shalah, meaning it's a psul yotze because it was taken from the azara into the kodesh. That's also called a psul yotze, meaning even if you are further into the base, I mean, there would also be a psul yotze because it's out of the azara. Zip psul shalah. V'ka'amar Rachman, the pasuk says she'yisaref, and it should be burnt. Palig Rabbi Yosef Glili disagrees. Umoki bechatas hapnimis. He says no, we're not talking about a carbon that was offered outside, meaning in the azara. Kagan para'elam davar. We're not talking about something that happened outside, but we're talking about something that happened inside. Bechatas pnimis. Kagan para'elam davar shel tzibur asher yuvav in dama kemitzvasa el oil made. You're talking about a parhelim davar shel tzibur, which is a particular kind of carbon. The whole tzibur made a mistake in halacha. Everybody did the wrong thing. They passed it incorrectly and did an isur. Everybody collectively got it wrong. So you bring a parhelim davar shel tzibur, a par to atone for the helim davar, the unknown matter of the tzibur. Once you find it out, and that blood is supposed to be brought into the ohel moed. And the pasuk says, "Loi seachel," you are not allowed to eat it. Now, that is not because something happened to puzzle it. It is because something correct has occurred, which is that its blood is supposed to be brought into the kodesh. But sorry, if nevertheless it has to be burnt. What exactly does that mean? Says Rashi, you don't need a pasuk to tell me that it shouldn't be eaten if something went wrong with it, because the pasuk says, you don't need anybody to tell me that you shouldn't eat it. Fine. What is this pasuk coming to tell me? Says Rabbi Yosef Glili that a carbon that is brought appropriately, what the Torah is telling you here, is not about a psul yotze. Is that if a carbon is brought appropriately, once it is brought appropriately, there is a separate din now, which is if it is everything is done as it is supposed to be done. It means that lisrof psuleihem abesabir. That mean if something went wrong, the pasuk is telling me that it has to be burnt in front of the base. I mean, there's on har habais and not outside of the three machanos. Has to be burnt right there, and also to tell that there is an isur in eating it. Meaning that if there is a psul, that there's an issue, and that's how he learns the pasuk different from the other Tanaim. Amr Lois, the Chacham said to him, "Chatas shenichnas dam lifnei v'neflim, chatas whose blood went inside of the Beis Hamikdash, Minayin, how do you know? How do you know that that this now becomes also? Meaning, how do you know with the para that with a korban chitza that if that was brought inside, that that's also psul yotze, that it's been taken to an inappropriate place? Amarim is said to them, "Hein lo huva istama el hakodesh pnima." That's what we learned from the conversation between Moshe and Aaron. That Moshe says to Aaron, "I don't understand why you didn't eat from this korban. The blood wasn't taken into the kodesh. It doesn't have any psul yotze." Michlal, that implies the inafik ihu, that if it went outside of the azara, inami ayel dama, or it went into the kodesh, that it would be possible and it would be b'shrefa. You'd have to burn that. And so, what's the limit here? According to Rabbah, Rabbah is saying that Rabbi Yossi Aglili also clearly holds that since he's learning from the conversation of Moshe and Aaron, and he learns that this is a din, not just for that moment like we saw yesterday, but that this is a din for all time, that we have learned from the conversation between Moshe and Aaron, that there is a psul yotze being taken in and taken out of the space that the korban is supposed to be, and it needs to be burnt. And not only does it need to be burnt, it needs to be burnt immediately. It needs to be burnt immediately. It doesn't have it, but you don't wait. Now, here's the operative conversation. What's the limit here, according to Rabbah, is that what are we talking about in all of this? So we are talking about the dam, that the dam was taken inside or the dam was taken outside. Now, the dam and the basar are not the same thing. The flesh of the korban and the blood of the korban are not the same thing at all. And the fact that Rabbi Yossi Aglili is telling me that if the blood goes to the wrong place, that the korban itself needs to be better, needs to be b'shrefa, what that means is that even if the psul is not in the thing itself, it is in something tangential. It is in the blood of the korban, even if it's not in the bus of the korban. If psul happens to the bus of the korban, obviously it needs to be burned. But what happens if the psul happens to the dam of the korban? So that would require burning as well, and therefore Rabbi Yossi Aglili must be in line with Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka and Rabbi Nechemia that we saw yesterday, that if the Baalim became Tameh, or the Baalim died, so then you are going to burn the korban b'shreifa immediately, and that's what you learn from Moshe and Aaron, that even if there is a psul that is not inherent in the korban, that's not in the gufa korban, it also does not require ibutzura, it can be burnt immediately. Okay, good. Adkan, Rabbah says that Rabbi Yossi Aglili is included in the list. But Rabbi Yochanan yesterday said that Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka and Rabbi Nechemia agree with each other. How come he doesn't include Rabbi Yossi Aglili? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan Savar, according to Rabbi Yochanan, why didn't he think that Rabbi Yossi Aglili necessarily agreed? Savar, he holds that dam and basar chadam ilsehi. No, maybe you could say that the dam and the basar, that those two things can be learned from each other, that they're related. That what Rabbi Yossi Aglili is telling me is that if the dam becomes possible because of Yotze, then the basar should be burnt. But the Baalim, the owners, that's a totally separate thing. That's a question about the ownership of the korban, whether or not there's appropriate ownership to somebody that can eat the korban, etc., etc. That's not necessarily such an obvious jump. Meaning, don't tell me that everything that's not the korban itself is tangential to the korban. There are things that are closer related to the bus of the korban, things that are further related to the blood, to the bus of the korban. And the dam is something that's right there. We can learn from it. Maybe the balim would not be the same thing. So we say dam ubasa chadam ilsi, balim milsa chrisi. The balim are a different thing. The dam is one thing, and the balim are a different thing. So he doesn't necessarily include Rabbi Yossi Aglili in that list. Okay, Ad Kan the Gemara. Up to the next Mishnah, we are about 10 lines down from the top of Pei Gimel and Aleph. Says the Mishnah as follows. The atzamos, the bones of the korban pesach, the hagidim, and the sinews, the hanoisar, and that which is left over. All of these three categories, yisarfu, they need to be burnt b'shisha asar on the 16th day of the month of Nisan, meaning the day after the first day of Pesach. Chal tersain lias b'Shabbos, but if the 16th fell out on Shabbos, meaning you had an erev Pesach, you have a Pesach that fell out on an erev Shabbos. And meaning you have a 2-day Yontif in Eretz Yisrael, you have Pesach, and then you have Motzei Pesach would be Shabbos. So which doesn't happen on our calendar because we have V'lo Adu Rosh Badu Pesach, that neither Rosh Hashanah nor Pesach can fall out on a Friday, but in theory it could happen in the days of the Beis Hamikdash. So Yisarfu b'Yud Zayin, it should be burnt on the 17th day of the month of Nisan, Lefisha Enim Deichen as Shabbos, because burning these things that someone's to get in the Nisar, that doesn't override Shabbos. But Yamtav and Yamtav also doesn't override the Chag. So you have to wait 2 days. Important preamble to the next piece of Gemara. There is an Isser in the Torah of breaking the bones of the Korban Pesach. The pasuk says, "Ve'etzem lo tishbru bai." Don't break the bones of the Korban Pesach. And the question is, when is that Isser going to apply? And what do you do with the marrow that is inside of that korban that is in theory edible, but there is no way of getting to it without violating the Isser? So keep those two questions in mind, and we will discuss in the Gemara. It says the Gemara as follows: Amar of Mari bar Avua. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak says, Mari bar Avua, in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak, Atzmas Kachim Sheshimshu Naisa. If you have bones of Kachim that have been an assistant, or they've served noiser, meaning they've held the noiser. There's meat that's on the bones that was left over. So the bones were holding the meat. Those bones, what happens to them? They are going to be metame your hands, just like noiser. Meaning there's a gzera. The Chacham said that noiser is metame seyadayim. Noiser makes you tame. It needs to be burnt, but it also makes you tame. And says Rabbi Yitzchak that the bones are also going to make you tame, even though they are not meat. Meaning the bones themselves are not, strictly speaking, noiser, because you can't eat the bones. But if they served as something that holds onto the meat of the korban, and that meat becomes noiser, so then, says Rabbi Yitzchak, that is now going to be noiser assisting bones. Because it became a basis, became a stand for something which is a principle that we have, a concept that we have from the halachas of muktzah, that a basar l'davar asur is also muktzah. So this is a basis, it became a basis for this. So now the Gemara wants to say, where does he get this from? Maybe his proof is, maybe the support for this din of Rabbi Yitzchak is our Mishnah. Let us sign that the bones and the sinews and the noiser have to be burnt on the 17th, on the 16th. Hani atzamas. So now the Gemara wants to understand. Let's investigate. Hani atzamas. These bones. Hechidami. What bones are we talking about here? What bones need to be burnt? If you want to say that there's no marrow inside of them, why do they have to be burnt? There's no reason to burn them. There's no noiser there. So nishadinu. So throw them out. There's no reason not to discard them. Meaning they're bones. You couldn't have eaten them. There's no noiser, so throw them out. Ella pshita de isbehuma. Now it has to be, if you're saying that you have to burn them, it must be because there is marrow inside of them. Amar bishlame, and if you want to say shimush noiser milsahi, that serving noiser, bone serving noiser is a thing, as Rabbi Yitzchak wants to say. That's why they need sefer. That is logical. But if you want to say shimush noiser lav milsahi, that being in the assistance of noiser, meaning the thing that's holding on to noiser, is not a milsa, is not a thing, not a problem. Lamal sefer. Why do you need to burn them at all? Nitberinhu, what you should do is break them open. V'nechal tzalamayach, scoop out the marrow inside of them. The marrow that's inside of them. V'nisrefei, and burn them. V'nishdinu ledidhu, and then you can throw out the bones, no problem. Says the Gemara, rather you have to conclude from our Mishnah is that shimush noiser is a milsa, and that is the support for Rabbi Yitzchak. Says the Gemara, hold up 1 second. Omri, they said no. Shimush noiser lav milsa. Maybe shimush noiser is not a thing at all. Vika safar, and the Tana of the Mishnah is holding that when the pasuk says ve'etzem lo yishbru boy, don't break any bones of it, bekasher va'afilu b'pasel. It means you are never allowed to break the bones of noiser. You're never ever allowed to break the bones of the Korban Pesach. Afilu b'pasel, even if it is pasel, meaning at the end of Seder night there are bones that you couldn't have broken, but you cannot break them now either, and therefore, at the end of the Seder, everybody has a collection of marrow bones that you couldn't eat that are now noiser and you have to burn. Everybody has this. That's what the Mishnah is telling us. Is that that there are parts, there are bones and there are sinews, and everybody's going to have those things. And any meat that was left over, that all has to be burnt. Meaning everything, everybody's going to have some part of the Korban Pesach that has to be burnt. And these bones have to be burnt. Why do they have to be burnt? Because you can't break them. There's an issur of breaking them. Says the Gemara, no. hold on a second. I feel a bit puzzled. You think that there would be an issur, that the Tana of the Mishnah is holding that there is an issur of breaking these bones even once you cannot eat from them, that the puzzle. Didn't we learn in our Mishnah aval moise betar, that if you leave anything of the flesh of the carbon that is star, the meat of the carbon that's star, vashoiver betame, and a person that breaks the bone of a tame, carbon, as harbaim, you don't get malchus for that. Meaning, there's no isur. You cannot say that there's an isur of breaking the bone of the carbon pesach once it is puzzle, because the pasuk says, the Mishnah says, that if you break the bone of a carbon that's tummy, there's no isur. Meaning, you don't get lashes for that. So, unless you want to say is now one din when it's kosher, one din when it's puzzle, that'd be a wild thing to say. It's the same din deraisa. So it cannot be that isur applies then. So it says, no, like kasha. We can differentiate. Kan shahaisa shasa kosher. Here, if there was ever a point in time that there was a shasa kosher when you could have eaten the carbon, meaning before it became nice, so you could have eaten from this carbon, those bones you are never allowed to eat, never allowed to break. But if it became tummy, a puzzle, something happened to it before you even got to say it or not, so then etzem doesn't apply anymore, and that's where you wouldn't get malchus. Says the Gemara, who is the Tana that differentiates between a Karban Pesach that had a moment that it was kosher to one that did not have a moment that was kosher? Rabbi Yaakov, this is the opinion of Rabbi Yaakov. And this, meaning, assuming that we are still trying to dispute whether or not Rabbi Yitzchak has a support from our Mishnah, it would mean that our Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Yaakov. The Tanya, that Rabbi Yaakov says, teaches us as follows, the pasuk says, don't break a bone in it, be kosher, in a kosher carbon, and that there's no such issue in a puzzle. Rabbi Yaakov says, no, if there was ever a time that it was good to use, it was fit to use, and then it became unfit, there is still the isur shviras etzem that perpetuates to eternity. You were never allowed to break a bone there. But if it never had a time that it could have been used, then there is no isur of shviras etzem at all. Rabbi Shimon holds, no, there is never going to be a isur shviras etzem if it had no shasa kosher, or if it became possible. In both of those cases, he says that there would be no isur of shviras etzem. Now the Gemara challenges this, meaning challenges Rabbi Yitzchak. We've seen that our Mishnah doesn't necessarily support Rabbi Yitzchak's din. Now we are going to challenge Rabbi Yitzchak's din from another source. Says the Gemara, the din is that all bones of kachim do not need to be burnt. They don't need to be burnt. Except for the bones of Pesach. Because of the stumbling block, because we're worried about some isur, right? What's the isur? That don't break the bones. Says the Gemara as follows. Okay, Rabbi Yitzchak wanted to tell us that there is a concept of atzamas being a basis for the noiser, and that would make the bones also by themselves. So we've just learned a Mishnah that says that that any atzamos of kachim don't need to be burnt except for those of Pesach, and the reason that you have this of Pesach is because of the takala, because of the esem leish b'rubai. So hani atzamas hechdami. What bones are we talking about here? If you want to say that they don't have any marrow in them, why do they need to be burnt? Ella pshita the isbu marach. Rather, you have to conclude that they do have marach, meaning they do have noiser in them. And if you hold that being a basis, an assistant holding on to noiser, is an isur, meaning makes it into a thing. Atzamas kachim amai interim shreifa. Well, then why exactly would the atzamas of kachim not need shreifa? Why would they not need to be burnt? L'chara, they would need to be burnt, and you should, in fact, burn them. Why do you say atzamas kachim in interim shreifa? So rather, you have to conclude that we are not talking that Rabbi Yitzchak is incorrect, and that Shimush Naisar is lav milsi. It's not a thing, and that's why the Atzamas of Kachim don't need to be burnt, because all that you do is you break it open, you scrape out the marrow, and then you can burn the marrow and throw away the bones. The bones themselves don't need any special treatment. Amar of Nachman Yitzchak says of Nachman Yitzchak. No, we can still save Rabbi Yitzchak. What are we talking about? What are we talking about? Is that in the case when you found the bones the next morning, you found the bones of the korban, and you found that they were cracked. You found that they were scooped out already, right? I mean, the bones were cracked and the marrow was taken out. Atamas kachim. With regards to the atamas of kachim, there's no issue of breaking those bones in the eating of the korban or in the usage of the korban at all. So which means that they were probably broken open and they were scooped out and the marrow was eaten before this became noser. That's why the bones were cracked. And they never were used as a basis for noser. They never did anything with noser, meaning the noser was already done. I mean, there was no noser. The marrow was done before anything could have become noser. Below bar shreifa, and therefore they don't need shreifa. I'll tell us Pesach with regards to Pesach that you found broken the yeshua mishum shviras etzem, that there is an issue of shviras etzem levasan havinoiser hu dechatzino. It must have been that they were only cracked and broken open and scooped out after they became noser. The havelu shimus noser, and then the bones were a shimus noser or bar shreifa, and therefore you should burn them. Meaning that this might, in fact, not that it doesn't disagree with Rabbi Yitzchak. This might exactly be what Rabbi Yitzchak is talking about. Says the Gemara, Rav Zvid says, no, what are we talking about here? Kagain, turning over the page to page Gimel on the base, just to finish the next few lines for completion of this argument. Shematzon Tziburim, you found them in a pile. You found them in a pile. This would be a separate support for Rabbi Yitzchak. You found them all in a pile. Mehem chalutzim, and some of them are scooped out. Atzamas kachim, when it came to kachim, de'ein bahem mishum shviras etzem, that there is no isur shviras etzem, l'chulhu have a chalisto. You can assume that they've all been scooped out. You found some of them scooped out. You should assume all of them are scooped out. Va'achalahu, because he ate them. V'loi bai shreifa, and therefore they don't need to be burned. At Thomas HaPesach, with regards to Pesach, the yeshua mishum shviras etzem, that there is an issue of shviras etzem. Dilma hanad dechaltzinu. Maybe these ones were scooped out. These ones are not scooped out. By shreifa, and therefore they require burning. Meaning you're gonna burn the whole pile. You're gonna burn the whole pile because there's an issur of shviras etzem. Now, what's the difference between the way that Rav Nachman Yitzchak wanted to explain this and the way that Rav Zvid wanted to explain it? So that would be this machlokas of whether there is an issur of the machlokas between Rabbi Yaakov and the Chachamim in the Mishnah, whether or not there is an issur of shviras etzem after the time of noser, meaning is there always going to be an issur of shviras etzem? So according to Rav Zvid, yeah, you could say according to Rabbi Yaakov that there will always be an issur of shviras etzem. That's why if you found them all in a pile, you should assume that there was an issur involved here at some point in time, whether it was broken or wasn't broken. The issur, you should assume that there was noser involved. According to Rav Nachman Yitzchak, you could say no. It's only by Pesach that you would say such a thing, because if they were, meaning there's no ways that you would assume that they were broken on Leil HaSeder, because that's where they would have been an issur. So they must have contained noser. And Rav Zvid is saying no. There's no reason to assume that issur is better or worse in one way or the other. You should just assume that since the other korbanos, there's no issur of breaking those bones. So if you found broken bones, you should assume that all of them are broken. If you found some broken bones by a korban Pesach, so then you should assume that all of it is asur, because it was for sure asur at some point in time. That would be the assumption. And Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, we will continue with this din and these gemaras with Pei Gimel and Beis tomorrow, and everybody should have a wonderful day. Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, the last time that we ever have to worry about fasting on Asar B'Tevis. Next year we should be zecher to see Binyan Beis Hamikdash Mimher B'Ameinu.